And now, marine weather around Alaska. Thanksgiving Day greetings. I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska marine weather. And on this Wednesday afternoon, the day before, we're looking at the ice edge, and ice is extensive. It's building across the far north along the Arctic coast, Chukchi Sea coastline into Kotzebue Sound, north side especially there of the Seward Peninsula, and then within Norton Sound. And it's also really starting to show up now too along the Yukon Delta with some ice there, early season ice in through areas of both Kuskokwim and a little bit of Bristol Bay, but still a little way. We have some milder air that's going to be coming up from the south associated with a frontal system that will kind of hold that at bay for a while. So late tonight into early Thanksgiving Day, this is what the map would look like at 3 a.m., shows pretty strong low, down around 960 millibars, working its way up into the eastern Aleutians. But this front extending out ahead of it to the north and east is rather broad, and it's bringing in generally a warmer southerly flow of air through the lower layers of the atmosphere. So this is going to have a mixed bag of precipitation as this front pushes up along areas of the southern mainland. Otherwise, along the coast, the immediate coast, is just going to be rain. And the precipitation is expected to be on the lighter side, but it could include at times some periods of light freezing rain, especially where the colder air hugs near the ground as you go up into areas of the southern mainland interior. But by the time we get into Thursday afternoon, the front is going to begin to weaken, but still just a general light flow of moisture coming in with temperatures that are going to be above freezing along the coast, and so this will keep things going, and then that front just becomes a trough and washes out as we go into Friday. Later in the weekend, though, there will be another push of wind and precipitation associated with a low that will lift out of the North Pacific and impact the Panhandle Sunday into Monday, and that could bring another round of gusty winds and some moderate to locally heavier precipitation. In the meantime, though, Thursday, look for winds to be southeasterly, inner channels, 20 to 25 knots here across the Panhandle. Gust as high as 40 knots within portions of Lynn Canal, waves running 4 to 5 feet. Outer coast south to southeast winds, 25 knots, waves generally 12, 13 feet. On Friday, winds do come down. Look for southeasterly winds 15 to 20 knots here through the inner channels, and waves 3 to 4 feet for the outer coastline within 15 nautical miles of shore. We're anticipating south to southeast winds right around 20 knots, so they could be easterly at 30 knots at Cape Suckling, and waves generally running 13, 14 feet. For the northwestern Gulf, winds will be out of the south-southeast because this front's going to push up right into the Gulf Coast and try to come inland a bit. Look for southeast winds, 15 to 20 knots off the Kenai and Hinchinbrook entrance, but here at the entrance of Cook Inlet, east to southeast winds at 25 knots, waves running around 7 feet. And then on Friday, that front just kind of stalls out here across the Kenai Peninsula, trying to make some progress a little further inland into Prince William Sound, but southeast winds 25 to 30 knots here in the northwest corner of the Gulf. Waves could be running as much as 11, 12 feet off the Kenai and off of Hinchinbrook entrance. But here at the entrance of Cook Inlet, southeast winds to 25 knots, waves 8 to 9 feet, whereas still a northeast wind at 20 knots, keeping some colder air up here across the Mat-Su Valley, with waves upper Cook Inlet 3, 4 feet. Across Kodiak Island on Thanksgiving Day, look for southeast to south winds 20 to 25 knots. And as we extend down along the North Pacific side, southeast winds 25 to as high as 35 knots there off of False Pass. Waves 13 feet or so, but as high as 20 feet there just off of False Pass. Bristol Bay down through Cold Bay. On the Bering side, look for southeast winds 25 to 30 knots, waves 3 to 5 feet. And then on Friday, winds will come down a bit across the region. Look for southeast to south winds 20 to 25 knots around Kodiak Island, 20 to 25 knot southeast winds on the North Pacific side, waves generally 10 to 12 feet. And then on the Bering side, Bristol Bay down to north of Cold Bay, we expect winds to be southeast to east at 20 to 25 knots with waves of 3 to 4 feet. Now, the low center is going to come up across the eastern Aleutians. Winds ahead of it may be 30 knots from the southeast Dutch Harbor, turning back northeasterly on the backside of the low, and then further west, winds turn to the northwest and increase to gale force, 35 to as high as 45 knots, especially there between Kiska and Adak. Waves out in the western Aleutians will be up around 20 feet. And then for Friday, look for winds to turn more northwesterly across the eastern Aleutians, and then west-northwest, I should say. And they do pick up again back upwards to 30 knots and a bit higher as you get out toward the western Aleutians. We could see winds 40-knot southerly gales, Kiska up towards Shimia, with waves there as high as 10 to 12 feet. Along areas of the southwest coast, east winds out of Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay, as well as St. Paul, 25 knots, waves 4 or 5 feet within Bristol Bay and Kuskokwim Bay, 10 feet out there toward the Pribilof Islands. Easterly flow out of Norton Sound and off the Yukon Delta at 20 knots with waves 3 to 4 feet there. And for Friday, still southeast to east winds to 25 knots within Bristol Bay and Kuskokwim Bay, waves 4 to 5 feet. But with the low circulation, winds turn northeast to north there across the Pribilofs and up toward St. Paul with 8-foot waves. And then northeast winds 15 to 20 knots out of Norton Sound down along the Yukon coastline with waves running 3 to 4 feet. Areas south of the Bering Strait, north side of St. Lawrence, look for northeast winds 20 to 25 knots, waves 4 to 7 feet. Lower Chukchi Sea, northeast winds 15 to 20 knots, waves 3-4 feet. And then as we go up along the Arctic coast, the Beaufort Sea coastline there, ice in place, northwest to west winds, generally 15 to 20 knots. And then on Friday, winds are going to shift to the east at 20 knots along the Arctic coast. And then as we drop down into the Chukchi Sea, winds may be as high as 25 knots out of the east there off of Wainwright. But generally east winds, lower Chukchi Sea, 15 to 20 knots with 3 to 4 foot waves. And then south of the Bering Strait, winds will be northeasterly off the Seward Peninsula to 10 knots, but as high as 15 knots with 3-foot waves on the north side of St. Lawrence Island.